Good morning. I met some of you last night. It's nice to be here. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we've done for the village and kind of what we have on tap now. Karen, next slide. There we go. So this representation started in 2011 on a pro bono basis. With our group, which used to be at another law firm, helping out with the sand management issues, a lot of which you heard about from Eric just now. We've been kind of officially lobbying and doing government relations advice for you since 2012. And we've worked on a number of projects and continue to do that. And I'll detail those. Next slide. So originally, the representation started with Tim Hutchison, who some of you might know. Tim was in our firm and is a former senator from Arkansas and also a property owner on Bald Head. That's Tim to the second from the left. And his wife, Randy, was also very involved. This is from a party that we went to last Thursday, and it just so happens that all the people who have or will work for Bald Head are in that picture. That's totally a coincidence. But so that's Tim and Randy. Next to Tim is Monica Schulteis. Monica is should be here today, but she has walking pneumonia, so she's not here. And we're just grateful that it's not COVID. And Monica's been doing government relations for 15 years. She was when Tim was working in our firm, she was kind of his right-hand person and did basically the work as a close team. That's Lori, who has worked with you since 2012. Lori is leaving Greenburg this week and going to the Kennedy Center as their lobbyist. And then that's me. So Monica is especially going to help with earmarks, which is something that Congress has just started up again after a 10-year hiatus. It's a controversial subject, and we still don't totally understand how they're going to do it, what the rules are going to be. They're going to be somewhat different than it used to be when earmarks happened, 10 years ago. But Monica's our specialist about that. You see my little bio there. I'm from North Carolina. I grew up in Kannapolis, North Carolina, went to school in Chapel Hill. And I'm an environmental lawyer by training and also a lobbyist. I've been lobbying the federal government since the 90s. And so I kind of straddle those two specialties. And when we need other people, and we often do, we just have some people there to point out to you. These are the first three are former members of Congress. The newest of those is Rodney Freeland Heisen. Rodney was a member from New Jersey until I guess 2020. He joined our firm recently. He was the chairman of the Appropriations Committee in the House. That's his expertise about appropriations and his contacts are going to be crucial for us. He's going to help us find federal money to earmark for Bald Head. Albert Nguyen is a former congressman from Maryland. And he served on the Energy and Commerce Committee, which is one of the committees that you care about. And Albert has lots of great contacts that we find useful. Charlie Bass, former member from New Hampshire, also former member of the Energy and Commerce Committee. And finally, John Altenberg, who was the head of JAGS. He's a major general, great connections at the Corps, and he's been really helpful when we needed to get some intelligence at the Corps. I think, as you guys probably know painfully, the Corps is one of those federal agencies that's a little decentralized. So a lot of times your business with the Wilmington is with the Wilmington office, Wilmington district. It's not always helpful to go to the court in Washington, but it can be in particular instances. So that's what General Altenberg helps us with. Next slide. This is, my slides are arranged a little bit differently than the agenda, but I'm just gonna go with it here. One of the issues that I've worked on for you since 2019 is the wind energy issue. As you know, the Department of Interior, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, has been identifying potential areas for offshore wind. This started back in 2012, and they identified the Wilmington East, Wilmington West, and Kitty Hawk wind energy areas in 2014. You can see you see on the left, kind of at the top, north, that's the Kitty Hawk area as it was first defined when they started this process at the beginning of the decade. And on the right, you can see what it became after they went through a process and decided, basically mostly based on input from the National Park Service, that they needed to set the wind energy area back. I guess the rule for Kitty Hawk is that it has to be at least 24 nautical miles from shore, and in some places 27, to protect some things that the National Park Service care about. So those are the Kitty Hawk ones. Kitty Hawk's been leased, and we are following that process for the village, really just to because that they have to go through an EIS process. They have a lot of procedural steps that they go through that'll be helpful as we're helping you go through those down the road. The Wilmington East and Wilmington West are down at the bottom. And the one that we're going to talk about is Wilmington East. Next slide, please. So the village has been engaging pretty actively with I'm going to use the acronym BOEM since 2015. Mayor Sayre started meeting pretty regularly with people at BOEM, and also commenting every time that we have an opportunity on any action that the Corps, that BOEM wants to take. So after some significant efforts by Baldhead back in 2015, BOEM took the position that it would hold off on further developing the Wilmington wind energy areas. In other words, it kind of took them off the development track that Kitty Hawk was on, and said that it would combine those with South Carolina, and South Carolina is quite a bit behind where North Carolina is. Basically, the process is that BOEM identifies what it calls call areas, and then asks for public comment. And from the public comment and its own research, it develops out of those larger call areas wind energy areas. So the South Carolina process right now is still at the call area stage. They haven't identified any actual wind energy areas in South Carolina. So this was a good development for Baldhead because it put you on a slower development track and gave more time to, to work on persuading BOEM. So during that, basically they did that in 2015 and suggested that there would be task force meetings and a plan to basically, one of the things that BOEM said is that it would spend that time working on Baldhead's visual concerns about a proposed wind energy project offshore, And it also made sense because the South Carolina stakeholders have some of the same concerns. The call area that's just south of here that would it would basically join up with Wilmington West is basically the Grand Strand, and there's a lot of concern there. The same kind of concerns that that you have about visual impacts of the project. However, basically, BOEM did nothing in terms of interacting with Bald Head. I shouldn't say nothing, but they did very little. There were no task force meetings. There were no active efforts by BOEM to work with the village on its visual concerns between 2016 and 2021. One of the things that we did in the meantime is we worked with the North Carolina delegation to get language in the appropriations bills each year. This is in the reports that accompany those bills, basically saying, getting BOEM to commit that it was not going to move forward with those lease sales in the fiscal year, and that it would engage with the village and other local stakeholders before it moved forward. Next slide. So everything changed in 2021 with the Biden administration coming in. There's a huge focus on all kinds of decarbonization policies, including the development of offshore wind. So we understand from our contacts in the White House, actually, that privately the White House went to BOEM and said, what are the projects that can be permitted or can be leased immediately? What can we do as quickly as possible? And Wilmington fell in that category. Wilmington West has some other issues, so they are basically moving forward with Wilmington East and not doing anything right now about Wilmington West. Wilmington West has apparently a lot of conflicts. Maybe the Department of Defense has some issues. Wilmington West also butts up against the Grand Strand call area. So that one's off the table for now. We're just looking at Wilmington East. So all of a sudden, this happened in July. BOEM created a new kind of task force. I think Chris has participated for years in what was called the North Carolina Task Force. And then, and this is all kinds of stakeholders in BOEM to talk about the project. In 2015, when they said, we're not going to develop the Wilmington wind energy areas right now, the idea was that they were going to combine with South Carolina and create a task force, but that never happened for 5 years. So very quickly in 2021, they announced the Carolina Long Bay Renewable Energy Task Force and held a meeting in July. And in that meeting, basically they announced that they were going to move forward quickly with leasing in the Wilmington East wind energy area. So some other developments that kind of affect that. I should also mention that in April, so April 2021, we organized a meeting with Mayor Sayre and the new head of BOEM. It was a nice meeting in which she basically informed him. I think it's fair to say she was blunt but polite that they were moving forward with Wilmington, and that there wouldn't be. Mayor Sayre asked if it would be possible to redefine the wind energy area so that it was set back from Bald Head, and her answer was no. So we've really known since April that they were moving on this. President Trump, in the run-up to his election in 2020, issued a moratorium on offshore leasing. Offshore, it originally was Florida, South Carolina. He then extended it to North Carolina, Virginia, And he did this under the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act. It's an unusual provision in federal law that allows the president to issue this moratorium. But that same president or a succeeding president, in this case, President Biden, cannot undo it administratively. It has to be undone by Congress. So President Trump put this moratorium in place in September 2020. His real intention was probably to say that there couldn't be any oil and gas leasing offshore these states. But the way he did it he did it in a broad enough way that it would also affect wind leasing. So that could have actually been a positive development for the village. The moratorium is for 10 years, so there can't be any leasing. The moratorium is set to take effect on July 1st, 2022. There can't be any leasing for 10 years after that. That creates an additional sense of urgency for BOEM. If you wonder why BOEM is moving the way that it is with the schedule that it has for this lease for Wilmington East, that's one of the reasons. They have to get this lease. They have to get the lease issued before July 1st, or they'll be in a moratorium. Congress there have been several attempts in Congress to undo the moratorium. There was language in the bipartisan infrastructure bill that passed in December that would have undone the moratorium, but it came out. We're not quite sure how and why it came out, but it's not in that bill that passed. So for right now, that moratorium is going to go into effect on July 1st. If you can, if nothing changes about that and the stakeholders can slow the leasing process down, then you would be in a leasing moratorium until Congress changes that. Okay, next slide. So the Wilmington East wind energy area was proposed in the Federal Register for lease on November 1st. You see Wilmington West and Wilmington East on the left, and on the right is Wilmington East. This is the proposal. So you see that there are those red shaded areas that are not being offered for lease. In the case of the one that's at the bottom, that's a Department of Defense concern that got raised with BOEM. And the one at the top, that's the overlap with North Atlantic right whale critical habitat. You can see the habitat defined kind of the cross hatches.
It's actually that one right there.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So, so it won't. What they're proposing for lease will be a little bit back from the 15 nautical miles that we have been kind of working with as the edge of the wind energy area, but it's it's not going to be far back. The proposal is to issue up to 3 leases, and the commenting period on that has closed, and so now this was a proposed lease plan. Now we're going to see a final lease plan probably any day now, with BOEM's intention to issue the lease by June. That's the track that they're on because they want to avoid the moratorium. Okay, next slide. We have been constant and I think consistent in commenting with BOEM. sending the message that the village would not be opposed to wind energy, but that it is opposed to any kind of development that's closer than 24 nautical miles to the shore. This is, as you know, the council has adopted a resolution to that effect, and some of the other local governments have done that. Thinking about how to kind of characterize that third bullet. From the administration's perspective, the politics are not in our favor in terms of the speed of this process and the determination to issue leases. We've benefited for years from working with the delegation and getting that appropriations language in the appropriations bill saying that the BOEM was not going to move forward and that it would work with the village. With the current Congress, we're not going to get that kind of language. We might be able to have an impact going forward. This is predicting what might happen with the midterms, but if what happens with the midterm elections is what prognosticators are saying, there's going to at least be a Republican-controlled House where Congressman Rausser can have more impact, and possibly a Republican-controlled Senate, in which case the North Carolina senators could also be more helpful politically. The difference, of course, is that in the Trump administration, there was not this push to do wind energy. So even if the politics change in the House and the Senate, you still have the administration who's going to move forward as quickly as they can. As we've talked about often with the mayor and with Chris and Jay, we think that the best thing that the village can do, obviously, is to continue its attempts to engage with BOEM, but also, to the extent you can, look for opportunities to coalesce with people, with other local governments. I kind of think that this is a particular issue for Bald Head. I know some of the other local governments have done resolutions. Not clear to me how strong they are in opposition, but we do think that going forward, it would be a good idea to try to develop allies and a coalition of people who are similarly situated, who feel the way that Bald Head does. Next slide.
Stephen?
Yeah.
This is Scott Gardner, Councilor Gardner. A quick question while we're still on the wind energy. Up on slide 4, back to slide 4.
Yeah.
In the right-hand picture, it gives the outline of Wilmington East as originally designed in a black line, and then the blue is what is currently proposed by BOEM, right?
Yes.
So all those areas on the south side of that original area are were eliminated. Is there, you talked a few slides ago about the Department of Defense issue on the west side of it and the right whale issue on the north side. Why did all those areas on the south side of this, why were they eliminated? Do we know?
It's a good question, Scott. My memory about that is that they were there were some Defense Department and also navigation issues about those.
Shipping lane.
Yeah.
Shipping lanes.
But I'll go back and look at the rulemaking and make sure. I think I see what you're suggesting, which would be, if there weren't any kind of insuperable hurdles, why couldn't they move it back within that area that they originally defined?
That's my question.
Yeah. It's a good one. So
Steve, I have a question too about that. So the National Park Service, what was their involvement with the Kitty Hawk? Was it
they were,
the lighthouse?
it was the Bodie Island Lighthouse. That was what they were particularly concerned about.
Okay.
And that's basically they wanted 20, I think it's 27 nautical miles from Bodie Island. And they objected first. This is how I understand it. And then the village of Kitty Hawk got involved also, maybe at the invitation of the Park Service. And they wanted 24 nautical miles from the village.
So, yeah,
And
obvious questions about Old Baldy.
yeah, and in 2018, when there was this Consensus Building Institute was a consultant brought in by Bohm to do that initial stakeholder effort. And they invited a number of us to Wilmington to interview us. And at the time, Chris Webb had went along with Carrie at the association, myself. I think Chris Shank with the Conservancy, but specific to the Old Baldy, that was included in that report. Although we know or we don't know exactly what ended up happening with that report.
Right.
It was finalized in a draft final report, but it was never carried forward. And those questions have been asked, but we've gotten zero response.
When I said earlier that that Bohm went kind of silent between 2016 and 2021, not entirely accurate. They didn't have any task force meetings, but they did start this process through this group, Consensus Building Institute, I think that's what it's called. And that was basically a listening tour. They went around and talked to people in South Carolina and your area. They put together a draft report, circulated it. You got a copy of that draft report. It's 2019. And then just ghosted it, went quiet. We've asked numerous times in writing and orally for a copy and some indication from Bohm of the status of that report. It doesn't fit with what they're trying to do right now. So they won't even answer what's the status of it. I think that basically the report, the draft final that we have has recommendations to address your visual concerns, basically. A lot of the report is focused on that and on concerns that Bald Head Island raised, some from the Grand Strand too.
If I hadn't already shared that with you, I'll send it to y'all so you can see it. How much of an impact that hiatus, I think, had a lot to do with the Trump administration just not having any focus on it. Just for context, to the extent that they never put anybody in charge of all.
Right. That's right.
They never, and that was at a time where they were actually really coming in on those congressional approvals to put cabinet members in certain.
Right.
So they never appointed anybody to be the head of both that whole Trump administration period. That's, I think, had some.
Definitely. I think the other thing is that for political reasons, the Trump administration is very focused on oil and gas leasing. Early on, Secretary Zinke was pushing very hard for the 5-year plan that would have moved forward with seismic testing and other kinds of stuff off of North Carolina, but also all the way down to Florida. And we found out very quickly that was not politically popular on the Atlantic coast, like a lot of maybe the Western people who are more oil and gas oriented, or Gulf of Mexico people. So I don't know if you remember this, but he maybe tweeted or some unusual way to make public policy, tweeted that there would not be any oil and gas leasing off of Florida. And then, but I think, as a practical matter, agencies they always have more to do than they can do. And their push in the Trump administration was oil and gas leasing. So I think that they just neglected this, and that worked kind of in our favor for a while. Let me say that, talking or looking forward, they'll issue 1, 2, or 3 leases probably before July 1st. I think there's probably a lot of interest. I think it's very unlikely that there would not be enough interest for there to be a lease. I think there's a huge amount of interest in offshore wind. So there'll probably be leases. All the lease will do right now is allow the lessee to do studies. And these are studies with pretty minor impacts. They're site assessment studies. So there'll be some meteorological buoys. There was originally going to be a meteorological tower, but in their most recent formulation, they don't think they need that anymore. So there's going to be some buoys and lots of vessel trips. Those are the main impacts. That's all they can do right now under this lease. They have up to 5 years from the issuance of the lease to develop what's called a construction and operation plan. That's the big plan. They looking forward to the things that you're going to want to be involved in when that plan comes out. It's going to be big, and we're going to have to focus hard on it, and that's when BOEM and the project proponent has to do an environmental impact statement. So you could be, we're in 2022, that could be 2027 before you see this construction and operation plan. And then from there, there'll be, however long it will take to do an EIS that can get done in a year if you're really trying hard. It's more likely to be a 3 or 4 year process. So in terms of when you might see the first turbines, that could be in the 2030s before that would happen.
And it's likely to take 5 years before they started the plan.
That part is unclear. If you look at Avangrid and Kitty Hawk, they got their lease in 2017, and they did their construction and operation plan in 2021, I think, so 4 years. But I think the lease will say you have to, if you're going to submit one, it has to be within 5 years.
Before you leave, I got to stay on this for a couple more minutes. Just for the council's point of view, and so we can start talking. There is some things going on. There are things going on. We've been meeting with mayors, local municipalities to start brainstorming other issues. The view shed issue has been around for X number of years, but there's a million issues that are really just as important, at least from our point of view. And it's going to happen during, when they're putting together their construction plan. We want to be able to affect that. There's, a history of dredging operations, which all of a sudden, slows down our ferry system, slows down our barge system, which means that, it just disrupts life over here. What happens when we all of a sudden have construction crews needing to get through that same area, set up time? We're talking about major pieces of equipment, materials also having to travel right through our area. Critical. The other, so one of the things that we have done, I've been talking to Jamie Simmons with Southeastern Wind, and they've agreed to have for all practical purposes, a symposium, and we're generating questions right now that we expect them to answer. It's great that it's Southeastern Wind, but I don't know what we can do to get a BOEM representative, direct BOEM representative for that as well.
Okay, probably. I think that's possible.
Okay, the other thing that is, Cooper initiated back in July a towers, I don't know what he calls it, towers task force or something like that. They had their first meeting a few weeks ago. they have a whole series of task force underneath this program that a handful of them would also be critical to get here. So I'd like to talk to you about that too.
Okay, that's great.
From our point of view, we have, talking to the other mayors, we've also been talking to some a couple of the people on the board of the association, and I want to just keep on expanding who we're talking to and getting involved.
I think it's terrific. It's a terrific thing to do. You're gonna be more effective if you can get more people and more concerns articulated as specifically as possible. And obviously, it'll be easiest to do that when you actually see the construction operation plan. That's going to tell you, how many boat trips it takes to take the turbine and the blades and everything.
100 turbines.
Yeah, it'll be massive. Those things are massive. So, but one of the things that we have been critical of BOEM about, they committed to Congress that they would talk to the village. They haven't really done that.
Right. And I, from history, I don't expect them to.
Right.
I feel like they're steamrolling over us. They have a deadline they have to meet. So the notion of the governor's getting a lot of cash out of this, political cash in terms of promoting this.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you're our people that also hit North Carolina in terms of.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that might be a maybe more advantageous direction to chase for a little while.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, because BOEM they're going to do what they absolutely have to in terms of engagement and no more with you. So I think your idea of a symposium is really terrific because you're basically creating engagement and basically daring them to say, no, we won't participate. I think that's really valuable to create those kinds of engagement opportunities because they're not going to do it.
We'll talk next week.
Okay. Any more wind energy questions? There's so much on this subject, a lot of details, and I'm always happy to talk about it if anybody wants to call me and discuss. Okay, harbor improvement. I think you guys know most of these details. The NC Ports did a 2003 study under the Water Resource Development Act, which basically allows a private or a non-governmental, non-federal governmental entity to prepare a feasibility study, which the ports did. They want to deepen the channel from 42 to 47 feet, and project costs $830 million. They submitted their 203 report. This all happened in 2020. And basically, without boring you with too much of the details, the original reaction of the Corps and of the Assistant Secretary of the Army that's in charge of this was very negative. They had lots of issues with the original feasibility study. The ports came back with a revised plan to kind of address some of those concerns. So the Assistant Secretary approved the feasibility study in May 2020, which was that was a necessary step before Congress would then appropriate money to do further studies. But they also raised, and you can see in the blue box, they basically said, we're going to approve this, but there's still a lot of problems with it. And they've got to be addressed in the environmental studies, the EIS. So now we're at the stage where there's, let's see, I think it's on the next slide. And that's the second bullet. There is an important point here. This is getting these projects approved by the Assistant Secretary is I don't want to say completely political process, but it is a political highly influenced by politics. You know, you don't just say to a port authority that is important for its state's economic, you know, development and health. No, we don't like your project, we're not going to do it. So the approval of these projects happens even with lots of problems. The question is getting the money to actually go forward. And so that the second bullet makes the point that there are a lot of authorized projects that have never had money appropriated for them and never will be. And that would be our goal for this project too. Or at the very least, you know, if this project were to go forward, you learn a lot of stuff about your sand management issues the hard way. The last time they did this, if it were to go forward, then you've got to get some kind of enforceable agreement with the parties that they will hold you harmless, that they will protect your beaches and do whatever they need to do to repair any damage. I think it's
Mitigation dollars.
yes. The problem last time I think was you had assurances from the Corps, but
Was in the final agency action.
right, it's not value, it's not, the government can make assurances all the time. Whether they're bound somehow or another to follow through with them is another matter. And so that, it's down the road. There's only a finite amount of money here. This is and there are a lot of ports along the Atlantic coast who want to do this, to handle these very large container ships. So in a lot of ways, if you look at it as a more regional issue, Wilmington is not ideally situated to get this money. And so, the fate of this project will kind of play itself out over a longer period of time, and also with lots of other interests who want that money. And we're trying to pay close attention to how that unfolds. Let's see, I talked about the next thing that's going to happen is the Nepa review. There's lots of opportunities there for you to raise your concerns, and that's crucial. That you monitor that process. We're monitoring it with you, and then you take every opportunity. Starting with the scoping when they start the process, and they'll issue a notice of intent to do an environmental impact statement and hold scoping meetings and ask for input, and we need to be ready to participate in that. Let's see. So there is money in the. If you're reading the papers, you see that Congress has not approved its budget for 2022 that we're in right now. We're operating on continuing resolutions in the federal government, but it looks like everything's falling into place, and that there will be appropriations bills that get passed for 2022 in March, unless there's some big hiccup that people don't foresee right now. And in those bills is going to be money for the Corps to work with the ports to start this EIS process. They can't start it until that money gets appropriated. So that's what's holding it up right now. So this year is going to be important. When that money gets appropriated, then we're going to start getting real involved in the commenting and the engagement with the Corps. What we can determine, and Chris, you and Jay might have more, might have had more recent interactions with the Wilmington office than the Corps, but from what we can determine, the Wilmington office is not particularly thrilled about this project. It is not high on their list of priorities. If that's the case, that's helpful to us. I mean, they'll do an EIS because they're getting money to do it, but so.
We have, not myself or Jay directly, but I think Charles and his office have had some discussions with the district to that point. Is that fair to say, Charles?
Okay. Let's see. The bullet that says takes 4 to 6 years to do an EIS. You know, it really depends on, we talked about this in the wind energy area. The BOEM will move as fast as they possibly can. In that case, it won't take 4 years to do that EIS when that comes around. This one might take longer. And time is, you know, we want it to take as long as possible.
I think at that point, there's a lot of other entities up the river that when they deepened it in 2000, it wasn't on their radar like it is today when you think of things like sea level rise and negative impacts up the river channel as far up as into Wilmington beyond the port that have been a part of stakeholder meetings with the 203 process. So,
Right. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so but I'm going to move to a different subject. Anybody got any questions about the port project? Always happy to answer questions and talk about it. So we always look for grant opportunities for the village. And we talked about this some at our dinner last night. And whenever we see some opportunity for funding, we forward it to you and are always happy to help as much as we can in terms of you know, figuring out if you're qualified for a grant and helping you submit a proposal to get a grant. I think there is a lot of money right now from the federal government, from the American Rescue Plan, that's probably sitting in the state because the money's been allocated to the state. There are some issues about whether kind of that money has a lot of strings tied to it, I guess is the way to put it. A lot of it is supposed to go directly to COVID relief, you know, to addressing the COVID emergency. And some of the other provisions are for infrastructure, water and broadband infrastructure is one of the categories that money's for. And then government services, but you have to do some qualifying. And I think we talked that the village is not qualified because you basically you have to have a budget shortfall to qualify for that money, and you don't. So there might be some opportunities with that money, but and one of the problems I think state governments are having, we're seeing this with the state of New Jersey that we work with too. It's just unbelievable amounts of money, and they're having a little bit of a hard time figuring out how to spend it. So if that persists, you know, right now they have to spend it in compliance with the rules that were put out by the Treasury Department. If it persists, then I don't think Congress will claw back that money. You know, it's possible that there'll be legislation that will expand the opportunities to use it, and we'll keep an eye on that. That's American Rescue Plan money. The infrastructure bill that just passed in December, there's $1.1 trillion of money. And there are going to be some projects in there that might work for the village. And we're pouring through right now a White House report that got put out last week, 2 weeks ago now, that basically has a page on every grant opportunity, cooperative agreement, and other federal funding opportunity that's identified in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And we'll be in touch about ones that we think might be possible for the village.
And Steve, this question. So you'll forward those to Chris, right?
Yeah.
And then Chris, in that determination, maybe that you have of what would be worth it, what would not be worth it. Obviously, you're gonna have the consideration of your manpower. If there's anything out there that looks like there could be a real cost benefit to it, I mean, you could just raise your hand, right, and let us know, and maybe there are other contractor sources that we could pay for. If it pays back positively, we probably no reason why we shouldn't do it, right?
So, as I think probably everybody knows, there has been for the last about 10 years a moratorium on what is referred to as earmarking in Congress. That's members securing money for specific projects in their districts or states. They started on a limited basis this year, doing what they call congressionally, they don't want to call them earmarks, they call them congressionally directed funding now. And so we're just about to start with FY 2023 with that process. And that's where I've done some appropriations work, but Monica is the appropriations expert. And she and Congressman Freeland Heisen are going to work together, and we're going to work with the North Carolina delegation and see if we can work with you to get some congressionally directed funding. We need to talk about, I think one of the things we talked about is a vessel that, like an emergency vessel that you could use so you don't have to rely on the ferry.
Right.
But we should probably talk about, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 ones that we can come up with. You know, one of the the rules are still in development, let me say. But one of the things that the appropriators have put into place, and this will get more developed, is that each member can only submit a certain number of requests every year, and they have to be transparent. In other words, and this is especially in the Senate so far, the House is a little bit different, but in the Senate, it has to be, the proposals have to be listed on a publicly available database. So you can go on the internet and see them, and they have to be there for at least 48 hours before the committee talks about them and votes on them. So there are these processes to kind of, you know, the idea is to, it's like a shame-based program, I guess is the way to put it. You know, you're not gonna sign up for the bridge to nowhere. You're not gonna propose that if it has to be made public before everybody votes on it. The idea was that those things got slipped in at the very last minute. Nobody saw them until the bill was passed. So, this process is still developing, but we are on top of it, and we're going to talk about what your priorities will be in the village, and let's see if we can get you some money that way.
And those things will be brought up at future council meetings as we start talking.
That's my presentation. Happy to answer any questions. We love working with the village. My friend Lori, who's some of you know very well, is taking this new job at the Kennedy Center, and it's always great to take a new job. If you know her, Chris, she's designed for that job. She's gonna love it. And if you like going to the Kennedy Center near Washington, call us, because she'll have lots of tickets. But
does she know you're saying that?
Road trip.
she's been saying it to a lot of people.
Oh, okay.
And I've said to her before, you don't really know. She said, my job is all those, 535 members of Congress that they want to go see something at the Kennedy Center. I get them tickets. So there will be tickets, can't promise every time. I'm an opera fan. I'm the only one I know, and my wife hates it. Everybody I know hates it, but I love it. So nobody likes the opera. So I have all the opera tickets I want. But Lori loves Bald Head. She loves Chris. She loved Mayor Sayer. She would have loved you if she'd gotten to know you very well. And so it's kind of killing her that she can't do both things. So we are very fond of this village and we like working with you. So look forward to continue to doing it.
Thank you, Steve.
Yep.